Welcome to World Code Updates, your daily briefing on everything happening around the world. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more updates. In a historic decision, the Supreme Court has struck down the Trump-era tariffs on steel and aluminum, ending a years-long trade dispute that affected businesses, workers, and consumers nationwide. The ruling marks a major shift in American trade policy, curbing the president's power to impose tariffs under the guise of national security and returning much of that authority to Congress. For years, these tariffs symbolized an America-first approach, aiming to protect domestic industries but drawing criticism for raising costs and straining alliances. The court's decision challenges the broad use of national security as justification for economic protectionism, demanding a clearer link between imports and genuine threats. Businesses and trade groups argued the tariffs were more about economic policy than security, and the court agreed, reinforcing the separation of powers. This is a turning point. The era of unilateral trade actions is ending, and Congress must now take a more active role in shaping trade policy. The implications are vast, from the price of cars to the future of manufacturing jobs. As the dust settles, one thing is clear: U.S. trade policy has been fundamentally altered. The nation now faces a new conversation about how to engage with the global economy. This ruling will be studied for years as a defining moment in the balance of power over trade. To grasp the impact of today's ruling, let's revisit why these tariffs were imposed. In 2018, the Trump administration used Section 232 of a 1962 law to levy tariffs on steel and aluminum, citing national security. The goal: make imports pricier, boost U.S. production, and protect critical industries. Tariffs hit 25% for steel and 10% for aluminum, affecting imports from allies like Canada and Europe. A sharp break from decades of free trade policy. Supporters saw them as necessary protection. Critics warned they'd hurt more businesses than they helped, raising costs for manufacturers and consumers. Companies making cars, appliances, and even beer faced higher prices, sparking a debate over whether the benefits outweighed the costs. Retaliation was swift. The EU, Canada, Mexico, and China imposed their own tariffs on U.S. goods, triggering a trade war that hit American exporters, especially farmers. The tariffs, meant to shield American interests, ended up straining global relationships and setting off a chain reaction of economic pain. This backlash set the stage for the legal battles that led to today's Supreme Court decision. The story of these tariffs is a lesson in how interconnected and fragile global trade can be. The Supreme Court's ruling is a clear message: the president's power to impose tariffs is not unlimited. The court reinterpreted Section 232, stating national security can't be a catch-all excuse for economic protectionism. Tariffs meant for emergencies, not long-term industrial policy, now require explicit congressional approval. This shifts power back to Congress, as the Constitution intended, and ends decades of growing executive authority over trade. Future presidents will need lawmakers' support for sweeping tariffs, making trade policy more collaborative and accountable. The ruling curtails a tool presidents have used to bypass Congress, reinforcing that major economic decisions should be debated by elected representatives. For Congress, this is both a victory and a challenge. They must now take responsibility for trade strategy. Lawmakers can no longer blame the White House for unpopular policies. The burden of crafting effective trade laws is theirs. This new era demands bipartisan cooperation and a deeper understanding of global economics. The days of unilateral presidential action on tariffs are over. Congressional leadership in trade is now front and center. The Supreme Court's decision has sparked strong reactions nationwide. Manufacturers relying on imported metals cheered, hoping for lower costs and more competitive products. Industry groups for automakers and appliance makers welcomed the move, expecting price relief for consumers. But domestic steel and aluminum producers, along with their unions, warned of job losses and renewed competition from cheap imports. For some communities, the end of tariffs feels like losing a lifeline. Economists and consumer advocates largely praised the ruling, noting that tariffs had fueled inflation and raised prices across the board. Politically, the response split along party lines, with many Democrats and free trade Republicans celebrating restored congressional authority. Protectionist voices, however, accuse the court of undermining American industry. The ruling has scrambled traditional alliances, highlighting deep divisions over how best to ensure economic prosperity. The debate over America's trade future is far from settled. The Supreme Court's decision sends a strong signal to the world. America is shifting away from unilateral trade actions. Allies like Europe, Canada, and Japan see the end of tariffs as a chance to rebuild trust and cooperation. The US is now more likely to pursue trade agreements through multilateral channels, emphasizing diplomacy over confrontation. This opens the door for renewed negotiations at the World Trade Organization and coalition building with partners. The ruling doesn't resolve disputes with China, but it changes the US approach. Future actions will require more evidence and congressional involvement. The focus may shift to targeted measures rather than broad tariffs that hurt allies and domestic businesses. This decision encourages a more stable, predictable global trading system, valued by businesses worldwide. America's strength will now depend on alliances and a commitment to a rules-based order. The world is watching to see how the US uses this opportunity to lead through cooperation. The era of trade wars is giving way to a new chapter of collaboration. The US must now balance national interest with global responsibilities. This ruling is a pivotal moment for America's role in the world economy. The end of steel and aluminum tariffs will ripple through the US economy, creating winners and losers. The most immediate effect: lower costs for companies that use these metals, from automakers to breweries. Economists expect this to ease inflation and stabilize prices for cars, appliances, and canned goods. For industries using steel and aluminum, lower costs could mean expansion and job growth. But domestic producers face renewed competition from imports, risking layoffs and plant closures in steel towns. The ruling forces US metal producers to innovate and compete on quality and efficiency. Exporters, especially farmers, stand to benefit as retaliatory tariffs are lifted, reopening foreign markets. The end of tariffs shows how trade policy aimed at one sector can impact many others. The transition will be tough for some, but it encourages a more resilient, competitive industrial base. The broader economy may see more stability and opportunity as global trade barriers fall. The effects will unfold in the months and years ahead. This Supreme Court ruling sets a new precedent for American trade policy. Future administrations must provide clear evidence of national security threats before imposing tariffs, closing the loophole for protectionist measures. The decision encourages presidents to seek diplomatic and multilateral solutions, rather than acting alone. Congress is now empowered to take a leading role in trade, with more hearings, debates, and legislation expected. Businesses and interest groups will shift their focus to Capitol Hill, not just the White House. The ruling may inspire challenges in other areas where executive power has expanded. It's a reminder that checks and balances remain vital, even in complex global affairs. The decision will shape legal arguments and trade policy for years to come. America's approach to trade is now more transparent, accountable, and collaborative. The Constitution's principles are once again guiding the nation's economic future. At its heart, this debate was about the Constitution and the separation of powers. The Supreme Court's decision reaffirms that Congress, not the President, holds the authority over trade and tariffs. The court ruled that the executive branch had overstepped, restoring the balance intended by the framers. This case highlights the importance of the rule of law and the predictability it brings to economic policy. Businesses and investors can now rely on a more stable, lawful process for major trade decisions. The ruling also clarifies the difference between true national security and economic competitiveness. The court set a stricter standard for invoking national security in trade matters. This guidance ensures that government actions remain within constitutional limits. The decision is a powerful reminder that no branch is above the law. America's system of checks and balances has proven its strength once again. With this Supreme Court decision, America turns the page on a turbulent era in trade. The days of unilateral tariffs are over. A new chapter of congressional leadership and international cooperation begins. The future of U.S. trade will be shaped by lawmakers, not just the president. This shift demands bipartisan consensus and thoughtful strategy to balance domestic needs with global engagement. The ruling also paves the way for stronger alliances and a return to multilateral problem-solving. America's global leadership will now be built on collaboration, not confrontation. The Supreme Court has reset the course of trade policy, reaffirming the rule of law and constitutional balance. While the transition may be challenging, the new framework offers stability and opportunity. The focus now is on building bridges, not barriers, in global commerce. This historic step marks the start of a more open, fair, and sustainable era for American trade.